Saratoga Automobile Museum. I love that place. That is so cool. You do such.
You like it.
Yeah, and it's plenty of parking. You park around the place, and we did a special on the Saratoga Automobile Museum about a year ago, I guess it was. But you've got a new exhibit coming up, and you're the curator of that exhibit. Is that right, Ann?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're speaking with Holly. Holly, tell me a little bit about, you're the curator of the museum in general, and you have changing exhibits, and you have a lot going on.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about it.
We change the main exhibit downstairs twice a year. So every May, October, the downstairs changes out.
And these aren't just little trinkets, they're bringing in
These are
cars.
full-size cars, yes, correct. And currently the exhibit is on the 1960s. The wheels of change, the life and culture of the 1960s. So we have some unique cars. I think people really enjoy it. And that's
You got the ones with the flowered tops? And
no, we do have a 21-window microbus, but we have an E-Type Jag, and we also have a XNR, which is one of a kind, Lamborghini Miura, a Buick Riviera, things, and then we also have a Rambler, which many people will remember.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, that brings back memories, right?
Bring back
exactly.
memories. Yes, it does.
So people should come see it. It's a lot of fun. It's there until middle of October.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is really kind of a cool idea, though, because when you talk about the cars from the 60s, if somebody was living in the 60s, you have any of them that are flower powered?
No, we don't have any decorated flower power. The closest we got was the Volkswagen bus.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it might be a way to kind of bring back those memories. But you're also doing your more current exhibit. Now, well, not current, but it's the one that you were highlighting today is the wheels. And we're talking about women and independence. Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe Ann would like to jump in on this.
Well, actually, Ann came to us with the idea, and she'll expand upon it, about Izetta Jewell, doing the exhibit on her. So it went from this little thought to, wow, let's do women in New York, 1900 and 1920s, and how did the automobile affect their lives, or how did they use the automobile to help others? And like I said, she'll expand upon that. So it just developed and it grew, and Ann is the guest curator for this exhibit. It'll be up for a year. It's in our orientation theater. It's what Brandon Sauls are.
That's your new little space.
That's done. We've always put art shows down there, photography stuff. So that's where this is. And Brandon Sauls, our art director, has done a fabulous job on designing it. It's really wonderful. People are commenting on it and love it. So it's exciting. It's neat for people to learn how women used the automobile and how it gave them freedom. They got to leave the farm. They got to go beyond their town. It was clean. It was safe.
And you didn't have to clean up after the horse.
That too. And actually the electric car back then was very popular with women.
They had big batteries in the back
because it was quiet and it was easy to start and it was clean.
And what are we doing? We're going back to electric now?
Yeah. And I'm going to say one more thing. Maxwell is a New York made car, and a lot of women drove Maxwells back then, and actually they promoted, they hired women to sell Maxwells back in the early 1900s.
Wasn't that the car that Jack Benny drove?
He drove one, and Alice Ramsey drove it across the country.
I mean, they're always talking about the Maxwell. He's going to go fire up the Maxwell. Yeah.
So it's very exciting, and she has done a fabulous job.
Let's take a look. Maybe if you could bring up a photo, and then we can talk about the 4 photos in that, and then we can take a look. Now, here we are. What are we looking at here?
Well, Ann, I'll let you talk.
The top left photo is Alice Hyler Ramsey, and she drove across country in 1909 when there was essentially less than 200 miles of paved roads in the country. She was the first woman to do that. Her trip across New York State took 6.5 days. And back then, tires had no treads. And you spent a lot of time repairing tires and so on and so forth, but she made it to her destination in San Francisco. The woman below her is Blanche Stewart Scott. And when I worked on Blanche's bio, I thought she was going to be my easy project because she didn't spend a lot of time working with automobiles. She was actually an early air aviator. But the problem with Blanche was she was a major fibber. And
a fibber, you said?
She was a major fibber. That's like the most polite way I could say.
How was she fibbing?
So it took a lot to untangle what her true story really was.
Oh.
And she had the governor of New York, whom the Thruway is named after, Thomas E. Dewey, convinced that She was the first woman to drive across country, and she was not.
It was Alice.
It was Alice.
Oh, but
Alice
she
got
was
mad and wrote a book.
Yeah.
She also said that she had gone to Vassar College, and there's no record that I can find of that. So the newspaper articles talk about
Don't
that.
you love people who fabricate?
And then later you go back and try to find out the truth.
We needed Snoops back then.
Right, and we talk a lot today about there being fake news, and once she got across country, the mayor of New York City had given her a bottle of water from the Atlantic, and she was supposed to marry it with the Pacific. She broke the bottle of water and just filled it up with tap water and pretended it never happened. And then it was really 1909. 1909 was when air flight really became popular, and she was set up after she got cross country to be the first woman to be a passenger on an airplane. And the AP reporter filed the story early so that it would hit the newspaper the next day, and the plane malfunctioned, aka crashed, so they couldn't do it. So it was fake news back then too. The stories just cracked me up. So
this is what's fun about researching, isn't it? Because you want to believe what the person said, so you're trying to find corroboration for this, and finding out there is none.
And then you're like, oh yeah, right. So there's two women in the exhibit that aren't shown in the picture. They have a Schenectady background. One is Izetta Jewel Brown Miller. She lived in Schenectady from late 1920s to the early 1930s. She married Hugh Miller, who was a professor and the head of the engineering department at Union College. She lived in the Stockade. She also lived in the Realty plot. And while she was here, she did a lot. She was in the first ever made-for-television drama, Queen's Messenger Returns.
Oh, that was the very first one that was
the very first one, and she was the star of that show.
I did not know that.
And that's what started me on this journey. My friend Joe Piazza had got us
I
involved.
know Joe. I knew him, when he was alive.
So he got me started on this great adventure with Izetta, and the more you get into it, like the trail takes you elsewhere.
Yeah, but isn't it fun?
It's
follow those threads and find out what you keep pulling at it, and finding out what's there.
Right.
And what was amazing is Izetta loved to drive, and she told me all about it. She loved the joy of driving. It didn't matter if it was mud, rain, snowing.
Fixing the tires, which was a big job. But what she did, which was interesting, most of the other women that are shown in the exhibit had another way to get vehicles. They had a rich husband, they had a wealthy father. Madam C.J. Walker is also featured, and she was the first black millionaire. So she had her own money. Izetta didn't have that. She was an actress. Sometimes they were climbing out of windows just ahead of the landlord trying to collect the rent because the play had failed and they weren't going to get paid. So what she did to be able to drive was she would present herself to an automobile dealer and say, hey, let me take one of your cars. I promise I'll double your sales, or whatever she would do. And she would sell 8 cars in a day just by tooling around in the car. She was a piece of work.
Well, yeah,
Amazing,
in Schenectady.
And she was in Schenectady, and I think she used to get bored easily, which is sort of one of my issues. Why I conned Holly into this. And she ran for office when she was in Schenectady twice. She ran for Congress, and she also, basically the seat that Paul Tonko now holds, she ran for that, and then she also ran for Assembly. And after that happened, Mayor White appointed her to be Commissioner of Public Welfare, just as the Depression hit. And her caseload went from 125 to over 2,000, just like that.
You did some great research on it.
She ended up in FDR's administration. She ended up, just before that, she campaigned for FDR with Phoebe O'Malley, who was one of the earliest women aviators, and she flew 5,000 miles for FDR's campaign.
This sounds like something that should be at the Schenectady Historical Society. They would
we're
love
working
to.
on that.
Yeah, they
it's
would
been
love
at my
to.
side.
Yeah, and my side's here. You can. Yeah, right. We make a lot of connections here anyway. So the exhibit is going to highlight these women, and how will people find out all these little details? Or are you going to be there, or is it on boards and stuff?
It's on the boards. We're hoping to do another event sometime in November because the automobile also played a pretty big role in suffrage.
Right.
Yeah, I would imagine it had a lot to do with that.
So we talk a little bit about that in the exhibit. The other woman that's highlighted in the exhibit that's from Schenectady is Dr. Elizabeth Van Rensselaer-Gillette, who was also a Stockade resident.
Yeah.
And she
There's
used
a Gillette house
Maxwell to make her rounds in Schenectady. First she walked, and then eventually she got the car and she went to visit her patients by car.
Well, it's interesting that I just saw a piece recently that in the early years there were 600 manufacturers of cars in the United States. 600 manufacturers, and then at the time that they filmed this, there were down to 6. So everybody kind of jumped on the bandwagon in the early years manufacturing cars.
When New York had 100
Yeah.
in the early years, we manufactured more cars in Detroit in the early years. Actually, there was a car made in Saratoga, the Cage Mobile. It was only one, but they made one. But yes, everybody, if you were a farrier, a bicyclist, carriage maker, everybody was trying their hands at it.
And they were all gasoline or electric power? How did they?
It was mixed. I mean,
mix.
there were electric at the time.
Some
but
were
mostly,
steam.
Yep, steam. You had Stanley steamers.
Alco made cars,
Yep.
but I'm not sure if they made them in Schenectady. Chris Leonard's going to look into that for me.
Oh, okay. I know they made the Sherman tank here, so I'm not sure if they made a car here. Anyways. Yeah, it's a wonder GE didn't get involved. Maybe they did at one time.
They were involved in the electric batteries.
Right.
The electric batteries,
Right.
of course. Yeah, they were there. And it's just, and Edison, of course. I mean, there's just so many connections from this area. But I was astonished to think that there were that many car manufacturers in the early years. Of course, they all kind of dropped off. Maybe they only made 2 of them or something. Who
Well,
knows?
that's a story for another day. But the manufacturers, they started consolidating and buying out the smaller people.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what an idea.
So-
What a concept.
Yeah. So that's
Maxwell became part of Chrysler.
right. They all got absorbed and moved on. And like I said, that's a whole nother story about how it all happened. And a lot of it actually during the 60s is, if I remember correctly, is when the big 3 really became to the forefront.
Yeah. Well, even
could be
you
mixing it
know,
with my previous
if you look
exhibit, but-
back, I mean, there was the Hudson. I mean, in our recent history, the Hudson. There was the DeSoto, the Dodge. I mean, I guess Dodge. They still make Dodge, but it used to be Dodge DeSoto. I guess so. DeSotos aren't made, and of course, what was the one with the Ford that he named that was a bust?
Edsel.
The Edsel, named after one of
His
his
son.
sons. Yeah.
No, I was going to say automobiles are fascinating and the history of them and how they affected our world, and you can tell so much about our society and where our infrastructure was and where we were as a country by looking at the tires, looking at the headlights, looking at the side view mirrors or rear view mirrors, because the roads were just dirt paths. And so there were no street lights. You know, where did you eat? Where did you go to the bathroom? Where did you sleep? And that was something we did. We have a map. She found a map, like a New York State and for the whole country, and it traces Alice Ramsey's trip. And she even located, like in Amsterdam, where she stayed. Alice Ramsey stayed and stuff. So we have that pin marked on the map, so you can follow her all the way across the country. And it's quite interesting.
How long did it take her to? I mean, is there a time?
She left the beginning of June, and she didn't make it until the beginning of August. But there was a lot of breakdowns, like the axle broke.
Yeah, and it's not there was a gas station on the corner.
Right.
Floods, all kinds of things happened on the way. And once you got past Chicago, the country was really sparsely populated. Blanche's story, the second woman, the fibber, she
Well, she
had
didn't say anything, right?
she had an entourage of reporters following her, and once you get past a certain part of the country, it's very, very sparsely populated, and you may or may not have facilities that you can use. She was a little concerned about going off into the woods and having all these gentlemen follow her into the woods because they always wanted to know what she was doing. So she went to a hardware store and a pharmacy and a couple other places, and she rigged up something so that she didn't have to bother stopping anymore. And then they started printing reports that she had an iron bladder, and the poor guys couldn't stop because they were going to miss the news reporting.
She outsmarted them. That was great.
So how long will this exhibit be up?
It's up for a year. It's up till next May.
Okay, great.
And what we're going to do, because this is so fascinating, and there's so many women, that next year we're going to do 1920s. We're not going to do 2 decades. We're going to just keep it to 1920 and find women in New York State, and of course in our area, that made a difference, or with the automobile, how did they contribute to the world, or how did it affect them?
Sounds like a great exhibit that we
It
need
is.
to get out there and check that out.
it's really good.
Yeah, good. Thank you both for being here. And
Thank you.
what a great jewel we have in our little backyard
Good
here.
deal.
It's right at the Saratoga State.
Yep, we're in the state park.
State park. I know the golf course and there's all that stuff.
The old
out
bottling
there.
plant in the state
Yeah, the
park.
old
Very
bottling
easy to
plant,
get
yeah.
to, plenty of parking.
Check it out. You're going to enjoy it and have a good time. Bring the kids too. Let them see what it looked like way back when. last year. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about another museum. Yay! We're talking about my size. Stay tuned.